Sports bettors, are you ready? When you bet with PointsBet, you get faster bets, faster withdrawals, and faster rewards. Download the app now and sign up with code NBCPOD100 to get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. Terms and conditions apply. Void where prohibited. Must be 21 years or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER for crisis counseling and referral services.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Circling the Bases, a podcast from NBC Sports Edge. I am Chris Crawford. I host this podcast every Thursday morning, and I bring on some very smart folks from around the baseball industry to talk all things fantasy baseball and more. Thank you to everyone who's joining us live via YouTube, via Twitch. We really appreciate it. Feel free to drop some questions in the comment section if you are joining us that way. Happy to answer what we can. Really appreciate it. However, you're enjoying the podcast. It's been a really fun season. My first year doing this, and I've had a blast. Won't dilly-dally anymore. Let's bring in my guest. He has covered prospects for Baseball America, given expert analysis on the draft for MLB Network and ESPN, and currently the senior writer for MLB Pipeline. Please welcome Jim Callis. Mr. Callis, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I talked to everybody yesterday that I'm currently on vacation, but I for a guy like Jim Callis, I'm willing to take time out of my vacation to talk prospects all day long. Good summer so far? Everything going well?
Yeah, I mean, it's the tricky part has been getting used to a new baseball calendar with the draft in July and the minor league season starting late, and so but I think we've finally come through that. This is the first time I think in a long time I haven't had some kind of major project hanging over my head. So
right.
It's all good. Usually that ends at the end of July with the trade deadline. But this year, draft was in mid-July, and we just finished updating all our lists and our farm system rankings in mid-August. So kind of takes a little getting used to.
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel it's weird because there is some sense of getting used to this stuff, but I'm also starting to feel like a sense of normalcy with this stuff as well, which is kind of nice. But that kind of transitions perfectly into my next question. So you and I have been writing about prospects for a very long time, without calling us old. That's the nice way I can say
I'm
that.
Old. You can call me
Okay, I can call myself old, I guess, too. But we have seen this industry kind of explode a little bit. And I want to ask you first, how have you seen prospect coverage change over these past few years, especially for better and for worse?
If you go all the way back to when I started in 1988 at Baseball America, it's crazy because there was no internet. We didn't have computers on our phones.
Sure. There
wasn't all this video. It was totally different. But I think in the last few years, I think it's just been the explosion of information. I mean,
sure.
Even in the last 5 years or so, I just feel like the idea that I can, not just on my computer, but on my phone, I can be wherever. I can pull up video, probably just about any prospect in baseball. I can find video of him doing stuff. And, I even have access to Synergy now, and I have that on my phone. So I can access Synergy on my phone, and just the advanced stats and data and all that stuff is so much more plentiful. And, I just think there's more outlets covering prospects and covering it well. The draft coverage, it's a crazy, I still try to think back, and I guess I just don't remember, when I started Baseball America, Alan Simpson was pretty much the only guy covering the draft. I have no idea how he did that without the internet or Google, because you'd find, or even really cell phones didn't really exist. We had a 1-800 number for subscriptions at Baseball America, and we would get scouts to call us on that. But it just amazes me, now, if I'm working on draft stuff and a guy brings up a player I've never heard of, I can Google, I can call up if it's a college guy, I can call up his stats. High school guy, maybe not his stats, but I can find showcases he was at. I can find his name. I can find what school he's at. I can find all this bio information. 30 years ago, you couldn't do any of that. You might not even know how to spell the guy's name or what school exactly he was at. So it's so much different. And like I say, it's just exploded, I think, in the last 5 years with a lot of the video and data and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree it is just absolutely crazy. When I first started, I started in 2009, which is a little later than 1988, but it seems like a long time as well. But it seemed like such a niche thing when I first started, and it's not a niche thing anymore. This is a huge marketplace now. This just kind of came to my mind as well. You've noticed, I'm sure, that the baseball card market has just exploded. And I think that what a lot of people like to do, and I will include myself, that I have gotten into this as well myself, but how have you seen, because of everybody looking for that prospect card, that type of stuff? Do you get a lot of questions around that stuff, or do you think that has kind of enhanced it, or vice versa?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's added to it. I think the interest in baseball prospects comes, I think two things that have really helped drive it more are, one, baseball card speculation. And I do get a bunch of questions about that. Sometimes I just get overtly, like, I was doing we do the pipeline inbox, which is like a mailbag column that Jonathan Mayo and I alternate. And one of the questions, I didn't answer it. One of the questions today was like, who are the best baseball card prospect values? Like other times people will be asking questions and they won't necessarily be that overt, but you can tell. Yeah. And so I'd say there's baseball card speculation and then fantasy baseball are the two things. And because again, like when I started, at Baseball America, I mean, I was like the fourth full-time editorial employee on the staff. Like we had a very small staff, and there was nobody really else covering. Like, I guess Baseball Weekly would have been the only other thing that did a little bit of prospects, a little bit of college baseball, but they also were doing so much major league stuff. Whereas it was, and that was it. And again, I mean, it sounds ancient, but there was no internet. Like there weren't bloggers or now. I mean, anybody who wants to, you just need an internet connection and you can post content or post video or whatever. But yeah, I think those two things have really driven it a lot. And I do think, we're going to see gambling. Now the gambling is no longer verboten. And we love gambling because gambling's bringing all kinds of money in that you're going to have from the gambling perspective. I think that's going to drive more interest in it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some prospects. The first name that I'm going to talk about is the guy who's number one on my fantasy prospect list. You would not be number one on my overall list. We'll talk about that guy in just a second. But Bobby Witt Jr., who is having a excellent season that is especially impressive to me considering how much he struggled when he that very first couple of weeks in Double-A. Not struggling anymore, on the contrary. But Bobby Witt Jr., is this a guy? I don't think we're going to see him make his debut in 2021. But if Bobby Witt Jr. does make his debut in 2021, do you think this will be a smooth transition, or should we expect, as a guy that kind of struggled at the start of his level this year and a little bit, I guess, in 2019 as well, should we expect more bumps in the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking at the guys who are on the top of everybody's prospect list, fantasy prospects list, he might take a little bit longer to adapt because I think there's more swing and miss in his game than, say, Julio Rodriguez or Adley Rutschman or Spencer Torkelson or whoever. But I will say, I've been pretty impressed by what he's done this year because, we forget, with the pandemic layoff, he played rookie ball and that was it. And then they jumped into Double-A and it was like, whoa, what are they doing? And he's handled it and he's been fine in Triple-A. I don't think there's any way we see him this year, Chris. I mean, I feel like a broken record, but just with the current CBA and the service time rules, there's zero reason to bring him up. The only case you can make to bring him up would be if the Royals thought they were going to contend next year and they wanted to have him get his feet wet a little bit. But I just don't think I don't think there's any way we see him. But I do think when we see him, he might take a little bit longer to adapt. Although if we look at how he's basically handled the upper minors with almost zero baseball experience before that, maybe not. But I think he might take a little bit longer than, say, different type of play than Wander Franco did. Wander Franco, didn't strike out excessively, but struck out more than he had in the minors and scuffled for about a month. And then he basically has been Wander Franco that we saw in the minors. So it might take him a little while to adapt.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think, too, the thing you brought up about the lack of experience is such a good point. But to see what he's doing in AAA right now is just so impressive. And I am a huge fan. I think this is going to be a 5-category contributor. This next guy is not going to be a 5-category contributor, but I think he's going to help a lot. Adley Rutschman. And I want to talk to you about Adley Rutschman's ceiling, because I think what makes him such a great real life, and I'm using my quotation marks for everybody who can't see me on the video this time. I think the floor is very obvious with Adley Rutschman because of what position he plays defensively and what he can do in terms of his selectivity and the power and being a switch hitter. But what kind of ceiling do you think Adley Rutschman has?
And it's interesting. when you have the catchers who can really hit, like if they're just kind of okay defensively, like for instance, Tyler Soderstrom, who's further away. Like if it were me, I would be just all in on Tyler Soderstrom's bat and say, I want him in the lineup, 140 games. I don't want the catching to take a toll on him physically. I want him in the big leagues sooner. Tyler Soderstrom is probably going to be a fringy to average catcher if he's a big league catcher. And that's fine. I just put him in the bat. But like with Adley, it's different because Adley's got Gold Glove potential behind the plate. So you don't talk about moving him. But like you asked about ceiling made me think about the fact that, so if he catches, I mean, that's going to take some wear and tear on him. He's going to be in the lineup less. He's really ridiculously good. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he does all. He hits for average. He hits for power. He's super select, switch hitter. So I mean, I could see him being a 300. Like if we're talking ceiling, like let's say 330 homer catcher. But like the thing I keep coming back to, like I think about, and that would be more valuable than if you put up bigger numbers playing a different position from a fantasy standpoint and from a real life standpoint. But like I just think about like I don't love comps a lot because I think they get forced and people don't always understand like the way they're intended. Sometimes it's just a fiscal comp or whatever. Anyway, like a comp I got when he was an amateur, his draft year, there was a lot of rumors about his shoulder. And like, I think some of it was almost trying to like knock the shine off of him a little bit. Maybe not like it cost him any bonus money, but like there was this talk like, oh, like, you're concerned about, might need shoulder surgery at some point, blah, blah, blah. And I was talking to a team that picked very high, but knew they weren't going to get a chance to take him. And I said, I asked the guy, one of my favorite stats, I was like, does the shoulder bother you at all? Like, does it worry you at all if you were in a position to pick him? And he said, no. Like he didn't even think about it. He's like, no, because if he couldn't throw, like if he woke up tomorrow and he couldn't throw and he had to play first base, he'd be Mark Teixeira. And I was like, okay, so he's like if I had to take Mark Teixeira at first base instead of, Adley Rutschman behind the plate, like I'm fine with that. I'd still take the guy number one. Or maybe, I don't know if he said he would have taken number one because Bobby Witt Jr. was in the same draft. So maybe it was first. Sure. It would have been tough. So anyway, I was getting a little long-winded there. I do think ceiling would be even higher if he wasn't going to get beat up behind the plate just by the total catching. But I do think, this could be a 330 homer catcher.
So it's an interesting thing you just brought up about the catcher switching positions, because the two guys that you guys have ranked very highly, and for good reason here, Francisco Alvarez of the New York Mets and Keibert Ruiz of the Washington Nationals. A lot of this, when we're talking about catchers, we're talking about the positional value in fantasy, because let's just be honest here, a lot of catchers in fantasy baseball just become irrelevant. They are not good offensive players. But Francisco Alvarez and Keibert Ruiz, I think, might be exceptions to that rule. Like, of those two, I would ask, which one do you think has the higher fantasy upside?
I think Alvarez does. Ruiz has hit. I think he's hit 4 homers in the last 2 days. So I was gonna say, the power's been something that's really kind of come on. The Dodgers, they obviously trade him. The Dodgers do a wonderful job of getting the most out of a lot of their players, and they made some swing adjustments and swing path changes, and he started hitting for more power at the alternate site last year, and he showed more power this year. I just think Alvarez has more offensive upside. I think Keibert Ruiz maybe has a little bit more defensive upside. And both those guys are good enough catchers to where I wouldn't think about moving them. But It's just with the catchers who are like I said, the catcher who you're not sure if he's going to get to average defensively. If you're all in on his bat, like Kyle Schwarber is another example, I'm like, I'd move that guy to a different position and just, that's why going back to Rutschman for a second. Sure. When there was talk like Henry Davis might get to the Orioles at 5, and, in the draft this year, the Pirates ultimately took him number 1. That didn't happen. But there was some thought he could go to number 5, which was closer to where he was ranked, I think, by the consensus of the industry. Like, how could the Orioles possibly take you? I did a bunch of Orioles radio. And I was like, no, like it would make sense. And they if they did, like Henry Davis, he's not a great receiver. He's got a cannon arm, but he's not a great receiver. And I said, and he's athletic enough, like maybe you just take Henry Davis, who's the best college bat in this year's draft, and put him in right field. Like if I'm the Orioles, I'm taking him. And if I think he's the best, I take position out. If I think he's the best college position player in the draft, then I'm taking him and I put him in right field.
Yeah, that would have made a lot of sense. I will say this too about Adley Rutschman. If he may not be number 1 on my fantasy list, but if you need anybody to make a 45-yard field goal, Adley Rutschman is definitely the prospect to do.
You can use it in two sports. Tackle. My favorite part of his football career when he was kicking at Oregon State was he once tackled Christian McCaffrey on a kickoff return and saved a touchdown. And I don't know if you've seen that clip, but McCaffrey gets up. He looks at him. He's like, "Are you the kicker?" And Rutschman's like, "Yeah, I'm the
kicker." It's so good. It is so good. The prospect I get asked about the most, and some of this is because I do have Seattle ties, but the other part of it is this guy just is really, really good, potentially anyway, is Julio Rodriguez. And I want to talk about him for a second because I think we can definitely rule him out for 2021 contribution because unless he signed one of those extensions that we see signed that make all of a sudden guys are just ready to play after they sign these extensions. Yeah. It's weird how that works. But Julio Rodriguez, do you think this is a guy who is a lock to contribute in 2022? And just what should we expect from fantasy purposes from this bat?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say at some point I don't necessarily know opening day. Right. I mean, I think some of it depends on where the Mariners are coming out of the offseason, if they're contending. What's the new CBA going to do in terms of service time rules and manipulation? Because, again, I mean, like he hasn't even played 200 games in the minor leagues yet. That's the crazy thing. He's 20 years old, and he's really good. But, like, you think about Chris Bryant. Like, Chris Bryant should have been up the year before he came up, and he led spring training in home runs. And the Cubs had designs on, maybe, being more respectable than they had been. But, Chris Bryant had to work on his defense for 18 days or whatever it was at AAA. Even to the point where the Cubs didn't have a healthy third baseman on their roster for the 3 or 4 days before they called Chris Bryant up. And we're getting weird shadows here in case you're wondering what's going on. The sun is setting to my right, and clouds go back and forth. I get both, like bathed in light, or then eclipse goes on. But anyway, like so with Julio, I think we'll see him at some point. And you could argue he might put up not necessarily steals wise, but like in terms of average homers, RBIs, runs, he might put up better numbers than any of these guys we're talking about.
Right.
Because I think there's less swing and miss than Bobby Witt Jr., who will steal more bases. And Adley's going to have the wear and tear of catching. Julio Rodriguez and Spencer Torkelson might put up better, just pure numbers, without factoring in positions. But no, I mean, it's Julio's fun. I mean, the question, I'm sure you get it too, Chris, is, I mean, and now he's not a prospect anymore, so we don't get as much. But like, who's better, Jared Kelenic or Julio Rodriguez? Like, and go back and forth on that one. But Julio Rodriguez is 20. He's played less than 200 games. You almost feel like you could put him in the big leagues tomorrow and he'd be able to hold his own. Yeah, I mean, this is a guy. I mean, I think he's power over hit, but like he can hit. Like I mean, he could be a 35 homer guy who hits 280 or 300, and he'll be up pretty soon. Like so, yeah. I mean, I think we'll see him at some point next year. I just don't know when exactly. I mean, like to be fair. Not that the Mariners haven't been beyond service time manipulation in the past. In his case, he hasn't played 200 games even in the minors at this point, and he hasn't played AAA. So if the Mariners came out next year and said, "Hey, we want Julio to play a month or two in AAA," especially I mean, look, Jared Kelenic moved pretty quick too, and he struggled. So I think you can make a legitimate case for him not being on the opening day roster, even if he tears up spring training.
Since you brought up Jared Kelenic, a guy who just absolutely, it was heartbreaking is probably the wrong word, but it was hard to watch him go through the struggles, has made adjustments. Still, the overall numbers pretty darn great. Do you have any real long-term concerns with what you've seen from Kelenic this year?
No, because one, he's still so young. Two, he's just such a good hitter. I think he just tried to do too much. I also think that like just losing a full year development, going to the alternate site or instruction league wasn't the same. These guys didn't get game reps. We saw a lot of guys you saw a guy like different type of player. Joe Adell like struggled mightily when they brought him to big leagues last year. And I just you look at guys like these are all different kinds of players, but top like JJ Bleday and Jeter Downs are having really tough years this year, and different guys handle that differently. And it was, I think he was ready to be challenged. I was surprised he struck out as much as he did. But I just think he's too good of a hitter to not be a good big leaguer. I'm not worried about it. I'd say there might be just a little concern because of how much he struck out the first time he was up. Like that was a little alarming, but like I still not too worried about it. And it's funny because I remember talking to him in the fall league in 2019 when he was coming off the great year's first full year in pro ball, and he had, I don't know if you remember this, he had his wisdom teeth removed, and so he didn't play for a while. And he was ticked off because he gave me the quote. He said, I could have played a week ago. I don't play baseball with my mouth. Like, I was ready to go. And then the Mariners just wanted to be careful with him because you could get like infections and stuff. They just wanted him to take it easy. So he came back and he had like 2 hits, I think, his first night. And I asked everybody in the fall league, what are you working on? What do you need to do to get ready for the big leagues? And Kelenic just looked at me, and it wasn't even Kai. He just answered my question. He said, I think I play in big leagues right now. This was 2019. He played 1 year in the minors. One player in the minors. And he's like, I'm confident. He's like, I think I can hit in the big leagues right now. I think I can play good enough defense somewhere right now. And he said, the biggest adjustment for me is I'm going to have to deal with adversity. And he's like, I haven't had to do that yet. And I'm going to face some in the big leagues. And he great foreshadowing by Jarred Kelenic. But he said, like, that's the thing that's going to be my biggest adjustment is learning how to deal with adversity. But he said, no, I think I'm ready to play right now. And so like it kind of like his struggles reminded me, although he was striking out more, of when Alex Bregman came up and went 1 for 35. And Bregman wasn't striking out. And Bregman was older. He played college baseball, so it wasn't quite the same. Right. But I'm telling my oldest son, who's an Astros fan, I was like, it's like, this could sound weird, but this almost made Alex Bregman better because, like, from what I know, like, just a couple times I interact with Alex, he's getting pissed off. Like he's he's not like, oh my God, I don't belong, but like, this is like basically BS. Like, and he probably wouldn't have said BS. That I'm 1 for 35. I'm hitting the ball hard. I'm better than this. Like, this is ridiculous. And Bregman turned it around real quick. And so I think Kelenic is wired kind of that same way. So I think he'll be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. Like the adversity thing, and also from everybody I've talked to, just an extremely hard worker, a very confident young man, but a guy who is going to work his butt off. It's funny you brought up Alex Bregman. The very first interview I ever did for ESPN High School, rest in peace, that is showing a little bit how old I am, was with Alex Bregman. And
were you there? Were you in New Mexico, or were you
I was not. It was just doing phone stuff. I did Alex Bregman, and then my next interview was with Max Fried, and the guy who stole the phone to talk about Max Fried because Max Fried wouldn't talk about himself was Luke Giolito, and that's when I knew that guy was going to be a superstar as well. Yeah, absolutely.
So back then, was there even, like, I know we didn't have Zoom, but like, was it just a phone interview?
I was me talking on a landline. Now, kids, a landline is a cell phone that you can't take with you. That is just showing how old that I am as well. Before we get into the second half of our show, I do have a special offer for our listeners. You can use promo code BASES10 for 10% off any premium subscription for NBC Sports Edge Plus. You can use it monthly, you can use it annually, and you can use it for any tier. So not only do you get access to the baseball season tools, but your subscription also covers NBA, Go Sonics, NHL, Go Kraken, NFL, Go Seahawks. I know a lot of you have fantasy drafts coming up for the NFL. Great time to get it. A great value if you play baseball or if you have your hands in all sports. So just remember that promo code is BASES10, and you can go to NBCSportsEdge.com/premium to get started. And for the first time in history, the two biggest sporting events in the planet unite with the Super Bowl and the Winter Olympics on NBC this February. You can go to NBCSports.com/once-in-a-lifetime for a chance to win a once-in-a-lifetime VIP experience of your choice. There's no purchase necessary. It is void where prohibited. You do have to be 18 plus to enter. It ends February 4th, and it is subject to official rules. I was going to try to do that like the Micro Machines guy, but I think everybody prefers that I didn't. I have to ask you, Jim, if you were given the choice of the Super Bowl or the Winter Olympics, which one are you doing?
It would be no question. I go to the Super Bowl. And it's I'm a huge football fan too, huge hockey fan also. But it's funny. So I grew up a Steelers fan. Just my best friend when I was a little kid was from Pittsburgh, and first game I remember watching was Super Bowl IX. This is a long time ago. And so I became a Steelers fan and just stayed with them through the years. So when they played the Seahawks in Detroit, I was like, man, I should have gone. I was like, because it's not that far. I mean, I'm based out of Chicago. I was like, I should have just gone. So I resolved. I was like, if they go again, I'm going to go to the Super Bowl. And so it was like perfect. So I had a connection that hooked me. I mean, I paid for the ticket, but I had someone who got me a ticket without ripping me off. And I actually had a sports writer friend of mine, Alan Schwartz, was covering the game. So I stayed in his hotel. My original reservations were 90 minutes away in Tampa. But I saw the Cardinals game, which featured three of the best plays in Super Bowl history between the James Harrison interception return, the Larry Fitzgerald, what would have been the game-winning touchdown, where he split the two safeties around the middle, And it's Antonio Holmes catching a pass among 3 people. And I'm a huge Springsteen fan, and Springsteen was halftime show. So, like, I got my money's worth. So, but I would go to the Super Bowl again. I would pick the Super Bowl again over the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. It is close. I do like an awful lot of Winter Olympic stuff, and I would love to see like the hockey and
I would go to the hockey.
Yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun. But either one, if I'm not allowed to enter, but NBC, if you're listening, hey, I can pretend.
They could give some tickets, Chris. I've been to the Summer Olympics. I covered 2 Summer Olympics. Well, not the the baseball competition.
Sure.
For Baseball America in Barcelona and Atlanta. So I've done the Olympic thing, and it's the Olympics. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it's just such a mass of humanity. It just overwhelms the city it's in. So it's not like you're just like, hey, okay, we got an hour between events. We're gonna go get dinner. Like, no, there's like a 4-hour wait to get into a restaurant. So
sure.
I'll take the Super Bowl.
That is very fair. I would take the Super Bowl as well, but again, I am willing to do both.
Hey, car shoppers. Car Gurus here with your word of the day. Confident. You know, that feeling you get when you're about to rock an outfit so killer, it's going to drop jaws worldwide. What if you could get that feeling while shopping for a car? With Car Gurus, you can. Shop more cars than you'll find on other leading car shopping sites. Find a deal that's really, really great. And see all the details that matter, like mileage, accident history, even days on lot. All on Car Gurus. Then, contact the dealer knowing your stuff and feeling more confident than, well, ever. Visit CarGurus.com today.
Are you tired of wasting time making trips to the grocery store, waiting in checkout lines, and overpaying for groceries every week? We thought so. Luckily, there's a better way. Misfits Market takes the hassle out of grocery shopping by delivering fresh, organic produce and sustainable groceries straight to your home at prices up to 40% less than traditional grocery stores. You'll get access to exclusive weekly savings on peak season organic produce, high-quality meats and seafood, and sustainably sourced pantry staples like snacks, pasta, and grains, plus keto-friendly and gluten-free foods. Do your weekly shopping in just minutes with Misfits Market, all with no service fees, membership fees, or commitments. Become a free member today and get $15 off your first order through September 30th. Just go to www.misfitsmarket.com and use code GROCERY15. That's promo code GROCERY15 for $15 off your first order. Misfits Market is not available in all 50 states. For more info, visit misfitsmarket.com.
So in the second half of the show, I kind of wanted to talk about, we kind of spoke about it earlier, but you look at prospect rankings, and for fantasy purposes, sometimes prospect rankings, they're always helpful. And you guys do such a good job. A lot of people do an excellent job. My good friend, whether he wants to admit it or not, Keith Law does a great job. Eric and Kylie do great jobs as well. They're so famous, I don't even have to say their last names. But I do think that it is a little bit different when we're talking about fantasy purposes. And one of the big things, of course, is in fantasy, the strikeout for the pitcher becomes much more important, or for the hitter, the stolen base becomes much more important. So you guys just updated your list. Again, excellent work. Can't recommend it enough. And we'll have you promote all of the good stuff you're doing when we're done with this stuff. But who would be a player, like, especially with your updated list, that you think offers a little bit more fantasy upside than maybe his ranking on your top 100 would suggest? And maybe he's not ranked at all, but who would be a player of that ilk?
Yeah, I looked at our list. I limited myself to guys on our list. And I just started looking at the bottom, and I was looking at positional value and things like that. You know, number 99 on our list is Sam Huff. Now, you know, Sam Huff's 6'4". He's not catching this year because he got hurt. He's playing first base, but you know, he actually receives fairly well. I think he's got a chance to stick a catcher. And he could be a 25 home run catcher. And if he's a 25 home run catcher, that's a lot probably more valuable for fantasy purposes than the 99th player on our list. So I think he's got upside. Sam Bachman, like with pitchers, there's always risk involved with pitchers. Sam Bachman just came out of the draft to the Angels, number 9 overall pick. We've got him at number 95 on our list. You know, he was shut down at one point during the spring. There's some reliever risk because he's not a big guy. It's not the cleanest delivery. But you're talking about on the right day, you could see 80 fastball on the 20-80 scale, 80 slider, pretty good changeup. You know, if he winds up in the bullpen, he could be, I mean, it's definite closer stuff, in which case, you know, that makes him super valuable. So I think, like, for fantasy purposes, he could have a lot more value than be number 95 on our list. And 2 other names who I think are gifted hitters who are just cracking the list for the first time and on the rise. Justin Foscue of the Rangers, who homered in, I think it was 8 straight games at one point this year, or 7 in the minor leagues. He's been hurt, so he's fine now. He had like a rib or oblique or something going on early, so he hasn't played a lot of games. But Foscue could be like a 280 to 300, 20 homer second baseman. And then Luis Matos of the Giants, really gifted hitter, and he keeps getting stronger too. So he might be one of these guys who he's only 84th on our list. He's only an A-ball, but as he continues to climb the ladder, he could have a lot more fantasy upside than the 84th best player on the list.
Certainly makes sense. Guys that I were going to mention as well. First name that came to mind, just to give my own perspective because I'm selfish, is Greg Jones is a player that, he can fly.
With a steal. That's a good one too. Because perfect.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just to say, I've been trying to get him on the list for a little while. I'm glad we did, but you're right, because of the steal component, not nobody steals like they used to, but Greg Jones could be a 40 steal guy. And that would make him a lot more valuable than the more we have. Yeah,
and that's obviously, being a top 100 prospect still is plenty valuable. And then the other one that comes to my mind because of steals and the position that he plays is if Nick Pratto does get the chance to run like he has, I think that value increases a lot just because, look, as a first baseman, and I think Nick Pratto deserves to be talked about a little bit too, because this player got some really awful reports from me just a couple of years ago as a guy that I watched.
In 2019. It was terrible.
Absolutely. A guy I absolutely fell in love with watching at the area code games. I loved that swing. I thought he was going to be a guy who could hit for average that I thought was maybe going to be switching to the outfield to kind of justify what type of player he is. He's kind of changed to what type of player he is, actually, which is just one of those things that you see. But I think Nick Pratto is a guy who, and a ton of credit for him and MJ Melendez. Both of those guys for the Royals were guys that really struggled upon their first times professionally, that I think can really help from fantasy perspective.
MJ Melendez was striking out at a 40% clip 2 years ago. And now after missing a year, he's come back and he's halved that. And he's battling for the minor league home run lead. So, and he's a good defensive catcher. So it's kind of crazy.
Certainly helps. Opposites end of that spectrum, guys who maybe offer a little bit more real life value than what you would see in terms of a ranking of just fantasy list.
Yeah, I think there were two kind of categories that jump to mind for me on that. One is players who are really good defensively, because it doesn't help me in fantasy baseball. Maybe if I'm in like a simulation league or something. But so 2 guys who were in our top 40, Jose Barrero of the Reds, although he is hitting a lot better this year. But I do think, I think Jose Barrero has like the upside of being like a 270, 20 homer guy. And that's his upside. But the real reason, the big part of the reason he's ranked 33rd also is that he's such a gifted defender. And that doesn't help you. And then I think the most obvious guy would be Christian Pache, who's kind of sneaking on everybody's rankings right now, who's probably the best defensive outfielder. You could argue outfielder versus shortstop. He's definitely the best defensive outfielder on anybody's prospect list. But I think there's more questions about his bat. And then the other category is I just think there's so much volatility with pitchers that there's a lot that I know. So on our list, we've got Grayson Rodriguez is the obvious number 1 pitcher to me right now. And we put Jack Leiter too. But Shane Baz is 3, and Shane Baz has thrown a lot more strikes this year. But is that for real? Because Shane Baz has never thrown strikes like this. I think he's probably, somewhere in between. I still think he's probably more average control, but he's shown better than average control this year. And let's say it regresses a little bit, then maybe he's not the 3rd best pitching prospect in baseball. We have him number 20 on the list. And then, this guy's good, but he's been overhyped going back to high school, and it's not his fault. It's Hunter Green. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and I think the caption is what baseball needs right now. And at the same time, I remember getting assigned a story by MLB.com. Is Hunter Green the best right-handed pitching prospect of all time? And I was like, I'll do the story, but I'm not going in with any conclusions. But I'm telling you, are you prepared for the answer to be no? Because I know the answer is going to be no. Because Hunter Green didn't have I always said Hunter Green generated 100-mile-an-hour velocity probably more easily than anybody. He was so athletic. The arm speed was so great. The delivery was clean. But he didn't have great feel for spin. And I'm just telling you before I even ask all the guys who've been doing this for a while, people are not going to take him over Josh Beckett because of the feel for spin. Because Beckett didn't throw as hard, but Beckett threw really hard, and Beckett had one of the better high school curveballs you'll ever see. So anyway, I think Hunter Green, he's back healthy again this year. He's throwing 102 or whatever. And again, I mean, I just think it's probably unfair to him. And we have him ranked number 27 on our list. But I think people just think that Hunter Green is like Superman because he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated in high school. And he's in AAA right now. But if you look at his AAA numbers, and it's a small sample size, his ERA is over 4. It's almost an inning. Like when he throws at his hardest, his ball gets kind of straight. And I don't think it's wow secondary stuff. So I think he's going to be good. But I just think the average fantasy player probably is like, I remember Hunter Green high school on the cover of Sports Illustrated, thinks this guy's going to be like Max Scherzer or Justin Verlander, and that might be
right. Yeah, I think that's fair. Like a little bit of victim of expectations. Two guys that just kind of popped in my head, and they're kind of similar. They're probably lazy to compare, but I'll just ask you about them anyway, because I think that they could be guys that maybe qualify for this, but I'll ask if you do. Reed Detmers for the Los Angeles Angels and Nick Lodolo for Cincinnati. Are those guys better? Would you say that they're better in the real life terms in terms of their ranking, or are these guys who still have plenty of fantasy value as well?
Well, I don't think that your classic, they're not going to go out and dominate you like Shane Baz or Hunter Green might. And it's funny because like Reed Detmers, I think we have around 25th on our list. And I like he'd come out of Louisville. And he was on my radar coming out of high school up here in Illinois. But if you told me Reed Detmers was going to rank 25th on our midseason list, I've been like, really? That seems like a little bit much.
Sure.
But you know what? He's thrown a little bit harder. Mm-hmm. His slider has gotten, he always had a really good curveball. He's got a good slider too. And I think with both those guys, it's not like they're not going to throw 98 miles an hour, but they have such good feel to pitch. And I think that counts for something. Like they're not going to walk anybody. So that's going to keep their whip down. That's going to keep their ERA down. They may not ultimately strike out as many guys per inning as Shane Baz or Hunter Green, but maybe they average 8 strikeouts per 9 and they pitch a lot of innings because they're efficient. So I get where you're coming from. And I mean, they're not. I feel like they're more floor guy. Like I think they're floor more than their ceiling.
Right.
But they still have pretty good ceilings too.
Yeah. Sometimes that gets taken as an insult. Sometimes like that they're floor over ceiling. No, it just means that there are guys who maybe have higher ceilings than them, and their floor is very high. Like it is very hard for me to watch Nick Lodolo and to watch Reed Detmers and not think, okay, that guy's going to be a really good mid-rotation starter. It's very hard for me to see how that doesn't happen. It's just they may not be fantasy aces. And then one other name I wanted to bring up, just because I think this guy may have seen his stock go up more than anybody. Gabriel Moreno, what are we talking about here in terms of potential fantasy impact? Because this was a guy that honestly was being talked about as another one of the many, it seems like, Toronto catchers who had a nice future, to being ranked one of the best catchers in baseball. What can we expect from Gabriel Moreno going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I still think he needs to polish up his receiving some. I like him as a catcher more than, say, Alejandro Kirk. But yeah, I mean, assuming he stays behind the plate, you're talking about a guy who might be like a 275, 20 homer catcher. Which, I mean, the catching position as a whole is probably as strong. I think catching runs in cycles more so than a lot of positions.
Absolutely.
But it just seems like right now, like I don't have the exact number from, but we might have 11 or 12 catchers on our top 100. And then there's 4 or 5 guys who were on the top 100 coming into the year, like Miguel Amaya and Ivan Herrera, and I'm forgetting a couple, and Dylan Dingler didn't quite make it, and Corey Lee didn't quite make it. But we could come. I mean, there's some years we do a top 10 position list at MLB.com in conjunction with our top 100, and this year there are 2 first basemen when we just updated. So we had to come up with 8 more first basemen to be on our top 10 list. And there's been years where we've had 3 or 4 catchers, and you need 6. And right now, I know we have more than 10 on the top 100. And there's also 5 or 6 guys who aren't even on the top 100 who could make it. So I just feel like catching is a pretty good position right now. There's a lot of up and coming young catchers right now.
Absolutely. It's a position, if you're doing dynasty drafts, it's not necessarily one you have to reach for like in past years. There are a lot of quality options. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the MLB draft, because there are very few, if anyone, who covers it better. The 2022 draft, and obviously there's a long way to go. And I think the draft class to me always looks better on paper, because this is one of the reasons I kind of got into prospects, the optimism thing. I think there's always optimism about an upcoming draft class, but on paper, and with the caveat that, of course, an awful lot is going to change. How good is this 2022 draft class on paper?
I think it's going to be pretty good. I mean, I know people are really excited about the bats. I mean, like if you compare it to this year's draft, again, I think the COVID layoff played a part, and it was harder on the college guys because there wasn't really as much summer ball. The showcase circuit kind of went on last summer for the most part, but the college bat class was not deep. Even the guy went number one. Henry Davis was not like an Adley Rutschman or Spencer Torkelson or Andrew Vaughn. We didn't have that type of guy. There was precious little depth. On the high school side, you had the 4 really good shortstops, and then a couple other players. But there were some question marks after the 4 shortstops pretty quick. And so I think next year people were pretty enthused about the group of offensive players on both sides. I mean, on the high school side, you have guys like Elijah Green, Termarr Johnson, Drew Jones. On the college side, you have guys like Brooks Lee and Jace Young and Kevin Parada and Jacob Berry. And I mean, I could go on and on. Like I haven't tried to do this in my head, but if you were to stack up and you're right. I mean, the guys look better on paper because like some of these guys will go out and struggle next year and be like, oh, what's wrong with so-and-so? But if you were taking the 10 best or let's say 20 best hitters for next year's draft and the 20 best hitters from this year's draft, and you're combining them, I think this year's the 2022 crop will look a lot better. I think the high school pitching is deeper too. Like look, there's risk, but like there's Dylan Lesko, there's Brock Porter, there's Jackson Ferris. Again, I could go on and on. I think the one area that is we kind of have to wait and see on is the college pitching. Connor Prelip. I'll be honest, I haven't looked to see. I don't know the people have had surgery, but 2 of the better pitchers were supposed to be Connor Prelip at Alabama and Peyton Pallette at Arkansas. They both got hurt during the spring, and I think Prelip had Tommy John surgery. I don't think Pallette. I think they're trying to avoid surgery Pallette, so you don't necessarily know how are those guys going to come back. Hunter Barco is probably the best pitcher, but I say college pitching is the one area where you're waiting to see who's healthy and who emerges. But the high school both hitters and pitchers and the college bats, I think people are pretty enthused about. So I'd say it looks pretty good right now.
That is good to hear. I'm glad you brought up Drew Jones because I want to ask you this. What prospect's son, and for those who don't know, Drew Jones, Andrew Jones' son, what name did you hear when you first heard a prospect coming up? What name made you feel the oldest? For me, I'll say it right away. It's Daz Cameron. When I found out that Mike Cameron's son, an outfielder that I watched play every day, had a son who was about to make the major leagues, what was that name for you?
Yeah, this will go further back than Daz Cameron. I think it was the 2009 draft, but it was Donovan Tate because when I went to college, University of Georgia. Lars Tate was on the football team. I covered Lars Tate, and he went on to play in the NFL. And so if it was 2009, I would have been 41 at the time of the draft. But anyway, when Donovan Tate was a guy, like he went number 3 overall to Padres. I was like thinking, wow, that's kind of crazy because I remember covering his dad. So he was one like a little before that, although it didn't make me feel old. But the assistant coach at Georgia when I went to school there, and he left to become head coach at Marshall, so he wasn't there when we won the national championship. But he was the big recruiter, was Hallie McCann, who was Brian McCann's dad. And so when Brian McCann was, I think Brian was drafted early 2000s. I didn't feel as old, but I was still like, wow, it's kind of crazy that like his kids who were probably 4 or 5 at the time are now like, because his brother, he had another son named Brad, who I don't think got to the big leagues, but was a decent player. So those guys, but Donovan Tate was definitely the guy who made me feel old, Chris.
Yeah, I totally understand that.
Well, I'm getting old enough now. Like, I'm trying to think. At some point, we're gonna have somebody's grandson. I'm probably, I don't know. I would bet the next 5 or 10 years,
sure,
there'll be somebody's grandson, and I'll just be like, man, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I will say non-draft version, seeing Wilson Betterment Jr. sign was heartbreaking for me. Like, oh, I am going to die someday. There is, I am that old because I still think of Wilson Betterment as a promising young player for the Royals. So that one was pretty tough for me. Jim, thank you so much for doing this. Please promote anything and everything you guys are doing over at MLB.com.
Yeah, well, we just updated all of our rankings in the last week or 10 days. So we did our top 100 list, those top 10 position lists, all of our top 30 lists for every organization. We just update our farm system rankings. And I think one of the great things about our site that I'm proud of, everything's free. I mean, now granted, look, I work for MLB.com. We're trying to promote the game. Nothing's behind a paywall. It's all free. So we give you rankings, we give you video, we give you scouting grades, we give you reports. and it's all free. None of it's behind a paywall. So that's nice. And the next week, I think next week I'll be doing a couple kind of historical stories where getting ready for Adley Rutschman and then also Spencer Torkelson and Riley Green, even though it'll probably be next year, where I'm going to rank, I think, the top 10 number one overall picks of all time.
Nice.
Which will be fun. You can almost do like the worst 5. Maybe I'll do it as a corollary. And then we're going to look at, and I haven't done the research on this, I'm kind of interested in doing it, prospect duos, the best prospect duos who debuted together for the same team. Like and this will date myself. I think of like the first names that jumped to mind for me were Fred Lynn and Jim Rice. I'm saying for Red Sox. I know Trammell and Whitaker came up together, and I actually looked at that. Like Jack Morris came up that same year, as did Lance Parrish. But I'm kind of looking forward to doing research on that. And I'm on Twitter, Jim Callis MLB. I try to tweet out a lot of what we do, and people can follow it that way. But yeah, if you come to MLB.com, MLBpipeline.com, you can see everything we do for free. And we're doing daily minor league coverage. We it's not our social media team per se, but like the Pipeline team. If you follow the MLB Pipeline account, they do a tremendous job every night of like, I'd say on a typical night, they probably post 15 to 20 videos of prospects doing cool things in the minor leagues. And like, I mean, that's the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is go look at the MLB Pipeline Twitter feed to see, hey, did Bobby Witt Jr. hit another bomb last night, or what Julio Rodriguez did, or whoever.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff. Again, thank you so much, Jim. That is going to do it for us. Stay tuned tomorrow. Drew and DJ, they'll try to match the magic of this show, live at 9 Eastern. Good luck. You can follow Jim again at Jim Callis MLB. You can follow me at Crawford_MILB. Thanks again. Please rate the show if you have a chance to do so. There are new laws passed. You have to give podcasts 5 stars. I just follow the rules blindly. Thank you again for listening, and stay safe, everybody.